Greetings, everyone. Warm welcome. It's an honor to have you here at the Sephiroth Center of Shamanism, where we break down the ancient esoteric practices of shamanism and the occult, bringing them into balance with the deep psyche. My name is Luke, experienced practitioner and mentor of the shamanic and occult sciences. It's an honor to have you here as always. Thank you for joining. Be sure to check out Patreon. Second link in the description of this video. There are lots of powerful occult training and initiation content that you will find on this Patreon that you can gain access to at just £20 per month. There is also an opportunity to join the monthly Transfiguration of Thalmiel ritual, which is a grand empowerment of all of the Qliphothic spheres. There is also dedicated sections for all kinds of different experience levels, sections for daemon magic, angel magic, the primordial dragons, the Necronomicon Gnosis, the Sephiroth, the Qliphoth, and many other things. New content is uploaded multiple times each week. I look forward to seeing you over there. Be sure to check that out. So today, we're going to be discussing Trans-Sephirothic initiation, which is the process of initiation that unfolds after the Tree of Life, one way or another. Now, I'm referring to this specifically from the perspective of occult Qabalah, not Jewish Qabalah, not Christian Qabalah, not the love and light Qabalah. I'm referring specifically to occult Qabalah, whereby we are ritually opening each sphere and or pathway and bringing the angelic energies into our body and into our lives to trigger direct and raw encounters with the cosmic forces that dwell within the tree itself. Now, Trans-Sephirothic initiation is not something that gets spoken about much at all. Many don't speak about the process that unfolds after you complete Kether, which is the final sphere of initiation in the Tree of Life. Now, what happens after depends on multiple factors. It depends on your soul. It depends on what type of evolution that your soul is needing following the initiation through the Tree of Life. And it also depends on your initiatory method. Now, if you are using the typical method for occult-based self-initiation, which is to initiate through the 10 Sephiroth, including the Abyss. So 10 Sephiroth, you go from Malkuth to Yesod, Hod, Netzach, Tifereth, Gebira, Chesed, cross the Abyss, enter the Supernal Triad, enter into Binah, Hokmah, and Kether, and then after that you undertake the pathways separately. Now, there are some methods of occult Qabalah whereby you initiate via the 4 worlds of Qabalah, which are aligned to the 4 tarot suits, which is basically where you initiate a region of the tree at a time, starting at the bottom, doing all of the lower spheres and pathways, and then moving to the middle, and vice versa. That is also a valid method, but what I really recommend people doing if they are wanting to really dive into the depths of self-initiation, which is by far the most intense way that you can do it, because you are not having the energies or initiatory process filtered by anything other than you, your true will, and the cosmic forces that dwell within the tree. So the idea is that once you have got into Kether, you will pass through that final sphere, which is symbolic of oneness, and then you will ground everything back into the physical, tangible experience. What goes up always has to come down. It's important to realize this, okay? Many enter the tree seeking the linear result of ascension and oneness and the true understanding of their soul. Yes, they do get this in waves, and yes, they have connected to a large current that is resonant with their higher self, but what comes up must come down. So what happens when you move through the final sphere of initiation in the Sephiroth, which is Kether, you spend a short period of time in that sort of liminal space. We are in a space here of pre-creation, and then you will find yourself shifting back into density. Okay, so when you're in the supernal triad, being Binah, the divine feminine, Hokmah, the divine masculine, and Kether, which is the oneness, the crown, you will feel like you are in higher planes of existence because you're communicating with higher aspects of yourself and learning how to embody them and integrate them. But once you pass through Kether, you will feel yourself rapidly shoot down to the bottom of the tree, whereby everything that you have gained within the previous stages of initiation grounds back into the body. So what you've just done, if you've initiated via Occult Qabalah, is that you've initiated through the lower 7 spheres, being Malkuth, Yesod, Hod, Netzach, Tifereth, Gebura, and Chesed, which are your personas. Okay, the 7 spheres that are symbolic of the 7 Hermetic principles, also referred to as the 7 days that it took God to create the earth, if you refer to Qabalah in a religious sense. These are your personas. When you initiate through Daath, the abyss, you break the mirror and you stop identifying with the reflection in the mirror and start to learn to identify with the source that is looking into the mirror, which is your higher self. And the supernal triad, the upper 3 spheres, Binah, Hokmah, and Kether, will attune you to that essence in a very raw and tangible way. So now that you've connected to your higher self and you've basically been transfigured by all of these spheres, now the real initiatory process begins to unfold. And it starts with your journey back down the tree. It can feel uncomfortable. This happens in both trees, both the Qliphoth and the Sephiroth. Once you pass through that final sphere, you will ground everything back into the body, and everything that you've gained will crystallize back into the physical, tangible experience. And once everything crystallizes back into the physical, tangible experience, a bigger initiatory process will unfold, whereby you actually have to learn to live a life in harmony with your higher self. This is where the real initiation begins. Understand that in both trees, the Qliphoth and the Sephiroth, the sphere workings are only the beginning of the process. So this is exactly what we are going to be discussing today. I'm going to be taking you through the process of Trans-Sephirothic initiation and basically giving you some examples of how this can start to unfold once you have completed the Tree of Life. So definitely stay tuned as we dive into Trans-Sephirothic initiation. So I'm going to show the Sephiroth here. When you initiate into the Sephiroth using occult-based methods, you are basically performing a specific initiatory rite to merge your consciousness with the given sphere and or pathway in which you are initiating into. When you are doing this in the form of self-initiation, it's important to realize that you are not actually having the experience of the tree filtered by any predefined paradigm or belief other than yours and your true will. This basically means that you get a more direct experience of the raw cosmic energies that dwell within each sphere and or pathway. Many books that you read on Qabalah, the Tree of Life, whatever it is, tends to project a predefined paradigm onto it. But when you are self-initiating, the only paradigm that you are carrying into it is your own paradigm. When you're working with angels or light matter forces which rule over the Sephirothic realms and what lies beyond, we are basically interacting with forces which have the intention, the evolutionary intention, to help you to function in a way that is for your evolutionary best interest within the multiverse itself. This differs from the Qliphoth. The Qliphoth is more of a deconstruction and decoding process, basically taking you out of the constraints of the multiverse, whereas the Sephiroth is all about teaching you how to embody your higher self from within the multiverse. So when you're merging your consciousness with these various realms, You are basically transfiguring your energy body in the image of the given realm that you are initiating into. It is not a set dissolving process like the Qliphoth. With the Qliphoth, when you initiate into a given realm or tunnel, you are basically cracking a shell, and you are then going to go through a significant dissolving process whereby you receive trials on the exact thing that you are dissolving. So it's more like you're dissolving whole identity layers, whereas with the Sephiroth, it is more of an attunement process. You're basically attuning yourself to the different cosmic principles and learning where they fit into your day-to-day life. So you climb the tree. If you are doing the sphere workings only, you will climb the tree in its natural order, which is starting at Malkuth, the bottom sphere, the earth plane, moving up to Yesod, Hod, Netzach, Tifereth, Gebura, Chesed, cross the abyss, move through Daath, into the supernal triad. You kind of dissolve into Binah, the divine feminine, Hokmar, the divine masculine, and then you finish at Kether. Now, with Occult Qabalah, as I've mentioned in previous videos, it is advised to leave the pathways out until after, because you're not just passing through the pathways when you are initiating into the tree using occult-based methods, i.e. through specific rituals that are tailored to merge your consciousness with the given realm. Whereas with a lot of systems and paradigms of Qabalah and the Tree of Life, the pathways are basically liminal spaces that you pass through. So they're treated more as sort of liminal spaces that basically carry you from one sphere to the other. As well as that is true, when you're actually merging your consciousness with these realms, they trigger drastic shifts in perspective, and you enter into a much more raw initiatory process compared to that of the spheres themselves. When you initiate into the spheres, you are basically merging your consciousness with that realm, that station of cosmic power, and you will experience a progressive process. So you'll experience the energies gradually increasing and then gradually decreasing. Okay, so the spheres are very progressive, okay, and you're initiating through them in a very fluid way. Whereas with the pathways, and it's also the same with the dark aspect of the tree that Qliphoth with the tunnels of Set, what you are dealing with here are much more erratic forces, cosmic and anti-cosmic forces that are basically symbolic of the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet and hold resonant with the 22 major arcana of the tarot deck. So when you initiate the pathways, it's not really progressive. It's more like you're turning a very harsh corner and your perspective is linear, and then all of a sudden it's not. It's in a completely different direction. And then you initiate into the next pathway, and then it goes like that, and it goes like that, and it goes like that. So it's literally like your perspective is shifting at a very erratic, in a very erratic way compared to the spheres. Therefore, it is advised when using occult-based Qabalah to merge your consciousness with all of the spheres one by one, spend about a month longer. You will definitely spend longer in Daath and the supernal triad, but spend about a month merging your consciousness with each individual sphere. So in an ideal world, you would probably complete the sphere workings in any space between a year and a year and a half. Now, what happens after Kether really depends on your unique soul's blueprint and on your intention for the next phases of your initiation. When you're merging your consciousness with these realms, you are bringing the energy into you, and when you do that with Kether, it basically opens a doorway to much more raw and unfiltered aspects of source energy. And this is what Trans-Sephirothic initiation is, or should I say the Trans-Sephirothic realms. We are referring to the undefined regions of initiation through the celestial planes that are not actually structured in any form whatsoever. So we're dealing with here the Trans-Sephirothic void, which are positively charged liminal spaces that are basically representations of source energy that are not actually defined in any set form yet. Okay, so you enter into Kether, you enter into what you call the Trans-Sephirothic void, or should I say you move into resonance with the Trans-Sephirothic void. And once you ground Kether, you then have an option as to what you do. You can either then proceed onto the pathway initiations, which is a very good way to actually guide your Trans-Sephirothic initiation, or you can do what many people do and just leave it at that and just let the process unfold organically. Okay, what I would suggest, and I suggest this with both trees, is that once you complete the final sphere of initiation, it is highly advised, in my view, to continue path working in some way, because path workings and initiatory systems do create order to your process and actually help to guide your initiations beyond the structure of the tree itself. It's particularly important with the Qliphothic realms. So once you complete Kether, you've got to understand that Kether is only a temporary state. As I mentioned earlier on in this video, what comes up or what goes up has to come down. So I see Kether as more of a window that you kind of pass through. And once you pass through that window of pre-existence, it kind of unlocks a door, okay, to the more undefined and unfiltered and raw aspects of source energy. So you move through Kether, the top sphere, and then you descend back down to the bottom of the tree. Now, this feels very strange in my view, okay? For some people, I think it can feel quite euphoric. For me, it caused me to feel quite under the weather, because it was kind of happening in both trees at the same time for me, where I went through Thalmiel, which is the shadow aspect of Kether, and then I went through Kether, and then what happened is that I just kind of shot down both trees at the same time. So I went from this high vibrational state and this sort of higher self state, which is the supernal triad, the different building blocks of the higher self, to then shoot back down to the bottom of the tree, and I found myself feeling very heavy in my body, not really sleeping very well at all for a few nights, and actually just feeling very, very dense in my body. And all of this was a sign of everything crystallizing back into the body, and that's what happens in both trees. Pass through the final sphere, everything will crystallize back into the body, okay? And it will take a bit of time after that last initiation to really ground everything back into the body and start to feel grounded again, because what's happening is that you're changing your blueprint. Okay, you've just attuned yourself to all of these cosmic forces. In the Qliphoth, you've just dissolved all of these illusions and opened the doorway to Citra Ara, and then all of that transformation and alchemy then needs to settle back into the physical level of consciousness, which means that you're basically rewriting your DNA in doing so. Yeah, and doing that is quite an uncomfortable process when it all starts to slot back into the physical body. It's all for your best interest, but it's not unusual to feel quite under the weather. It's not unusual to feel very dense and very heavy in the body, because basically you've been in the higher dimensions, the higher planes of existence for quite a while. So now it has to shoot back down to the tangible experience. So it will take a bit of time for things to ground. Now, the mistake that people make in both trees is thinking that that is the end of the process. Okay, it's not the end of the process. With the Tree of Life, when you leave it at that and just live your life, what you will find happens is that you will start to sort of climb the tree again. Okay, so you've just opened up all of these doorways, but you'll find yourself now climbing a bigger, more expansive tree. Okay, a tree that is not actually predefined. So you're not actually path working the tree again unless you choose to do so, but you will find yourself basically moving through a much bigger and far less structured tree itself. And this will happen on its own. Understand that this will happen on its own, because in going through these different spheres, you basically opened up these different doorways. And basically what you've done by exploring this occult method of Qabalah, by merging your consciousness with these realms, is that you're basically opening the door to very expansive aspects of the celestial planes. Now, for me, in my personal journey, once I entered Kether, I started to suddenly get thoughts of Enochian magic out of nowhere. And I had books on Enochian magic. I had Essential Enochian, who I can't remember the name of, but I recommend the book. Um, I'd read about Enochian magic. I knew a fair amount about Enochian magic, but I'd never practiced it. And once I passed through Kether, then Enochian magic just started falling into my awareness. Okay, I started having different dreams. I started to, yeah, like really feel very guided towards Enochian magic, which is really interesting. And at the same time, as I mentioned, I finished the Qliphoth and the Sephiroth like around about similar times. A similar thing was happening on the Qliphothic side. So once I had grounded everything back into Thalmael, I found, and once, still grounding that energy, I found myself being guided towards the Trans-Sephirothic realms, which are basically, if you use a predefined system, I was being guided towards the stellar outlands, which are basically the outlands which are outside, basically the regions of void energy, kind of crosses over into Lovecraftian Gnosis, but the regions of void energy that dwell outside of the tree structure itself. Meanwhile, I was also feeling guided towards Enochian magic. So what was kind of happening is that my attention was being distributed onto other systems that were basically gateways into the Trans-Sephirothic realms, okay, into the realms that were beyond the Tree of Life, and the same thing was happening at the same time with the Tree of Death. Okay, so when I started to really look more into Enochian magic and started to sort of create rituals and start tapping into the currents, I realized actually this is technically Trans-Sephirothic initiation. I mean, Enochian magic was developed by John Dee and Edward Kelly. Okay, John Dee was a Christian scholar and Edward Kelly was a scryer. So they kind of teamed up and tapped into this very powerful angelic language that is used in many different occult systems ever since. And this was way back in the 16th century. But what was being tapped into here was a very raw and unfiltered aspect of angelic magic and angelic based initiation. So when you really read up about Enochian magic and you explore the different keys and what each one does, you realize actually it works up in a similar way to Qabalah in the sense that it's starting, at the kind of lower planes of existence and then moving up gradually through the celestial planes. There are a total literally of like 58 initiations, if you include the first 18 keys of Enochian magic and then the 19th key, which is made up of 30 ether realms, one of which you face not Shugal, but you face Choronzon as Zax as part of the abyss, as the abyss of the Enochian system. So basically what I'm saying here is that once I finished both the top sphere on both trees, I found myself naturally being moved towards systems of initiation, path workings that would help me to tap into the trans realms, okay, the realms that are beyond the structure of both trees entirely. Okay, and that's exactly what I did in that respect. Okay, started exploring both aspects, and then I realized actually Enochian magic is basically the positively charged aspect of the stellar outlands. Okay, again, it's quite it's unregular. What should I say? Unrecognized personal gnosis is what I'm saying here. Again, it's only my gnosis, but it's interesting that it was coming through once I'd finished that last sphere. Okay, literally getting things and systems coming into my awareness of how to continue the initiatory process beyond the tree itself. So basically, as I've mentioned, you will begin to move into a much more vast process of initiation. Some people interpret this as reaching Kether, tapping into oneness, and then realizing that you're actually in Malkuth of a much, much bigger tree. And then you go through the process again, but in a way that is not as ordered as the first time around. Basically, you're expanding your consciousness more and more each time you do it, or each cycle you go through. Okay, you're literally mimicking the separation process and the integration process. So you're literally going up, collecting all of these angelic energies, grounding it all back into the physical body, experiencing the separation consciousness, for me, when I finished Kether, what came with it is immense density and actually quite a lot of existential grief for the separation from the state of oneness into the physical, tangible experience. There was a kind of existential grief that was associated with that particular transition for me. So once that sort of grounding process has initiated, then you're going to start to go through a process of initiation which is quite beyond comprehension. So therefore, it is advised to continue the path working in some way consciously. Okay, again, it's the free will that opens the doorways to these things. So once you finish Kether, I would either recommend exploring a system such as Enochian magic if you're wanting to continue to explore the celestial planes. And just the same as if you finish Thalmiel in the Qliphoth, I highly recommend exploring the Stellar Outlands and continuing the path working in other ways, because it's going to deepen the process massively. And you're basically emphasizing and recognizing the fact that it's just the training ground. Okay, these spheres in both trees are only the training ground. They're transfiguring your system, preparing you for what is actually beyond it. Okay. So you can do so by initiating into the Sephirothic pathways, which takes longer than the spheres. Okay, they take much, much longer because A, there's double the amount of them, and they're much more pivotal in nature, but I feel they are also quicker to work as well because they're much more liminal and much more direct and not so progressive compared to the spheres. But then what is beyond that is what we refer to as the three veils of negative existence, okay, which are basically the three veils of pre-existence before Kether actually came to be. Okay, Kether being the primal influx. The veils of negative existence are basically pre-existent states of consciousness that are beyond the tree itself within the positive polarity. So these would be called Ein, Ein Sof, and Ein Sof Or. And there's also a shadow aspect of those, which are extremely advanced Trans-Sephirothic initiatory realms of pre-existence in the dark matter realm, in the primordial chaos. And this is referred to as Tohu, being the shadow aspect of Ein, Bohu being the shadow aspect of Ein Sof, and Chesek being the shadow aspect of Ein Sof Or. So what these do is that these are, again, very advanced, but these initiate you into a kind of pre-existent state of consciousness, encountering, deeper levels of positively charged void consciousness. But then with the Qliphothic side, you're then literally decoding yourself from the concept of existence as a whole. Very advanced pursuit. I am not there in my initiatory process yet. I'm not ready to go into that phase of my initiatory process yet, as my initiatory process is ongoing within both polarities. But it is advised to only consider exploring the veils of negative existence once you have gone through the pathways of a given polarity. So once you have gone through the spheres and the pathways, but even when it comes to exploring realms such as Enochian magic and initiation and actually working with those currents of energy, again, it's quite an advanced pursuit. So it is important to have a solid foundation. A lot of the traditional occult orders would not actually start working with Enochian-based magic until much later on in the initiatory process, much actually far beyond the kind of Magister Templi grade. So ultimately understand that when we're referring to any type of trans-based initiation that are beyond the two trees, we're dealing with much more raw and much more incomprehensible forces of initiation that are going to be much more destabilizing and far less tangible. Okay, ultimately the purpose of this is to help you to start attuning yourself to pre-aspects of source energy. Okay, it's all a way to help you to explore both polarities and not bind yourself to any aspect of predefined form or structure in either polarity. Okay, because if you really want to explore each polarity in a very sort of in-depth way within your initiatory process, and you want to use it for full sort of evolution and karma purification, which both polarities can be used for that, particularly if you're doing both polarities together, or you're kind of spiraling between them, moving into the Qliphoth and then moving into the Sephiroth, or vice versa, then you're initiating a very significant process of karma purification, particularly when you get into the trans realms, okay, the Trans-Sephirothic realms and the Trans-Qliphothic realms, okay. But because we're dealing with stages of initiation which are far less tangible, it's very important to realize that it's very, very personal. So not everybody, once they finish the spheres of both trees, not everybody is going to feel called to undertake their trans initiation in the same way. You know, not everybody is going to say, do what I did and start exploring Enochian magic once they've finished Kether. You know, not everyone's going to start exploring the Stellar Outlands once they finish Thalmael in the Qliphoth, you know, so it is highly individual. And in a way, that's why this is the most challenging phase of the process, because it's infinite. You're literally in the void of both polarities. It's infinite, and it's also not really relatable to anybody else unless you're literally following the same path as somebody else, which is not the intention of this work. You know, the intention of this work is not to follow what somebody else is doing, but is to actually forge your path from within the raw aspects of the void, from within the pure potential that isn't limited by any false ideas of duality. So Trans-Sephirothic initiation is challenging, and Trans-Qliphothic initiation is also very challenging because it's never the same from person to person. Okay, you can know that you're tapping into very deep aspects of yourself regardless of what polarity you're working with, okay, and they kind of start to merge together. This is the beauty of, you know, I suppose, non-duality, in a way, that when you start to get beyond structure and form, i.e. when we go beyond the Qliphoth, the tree of death, the primordial chaos, and we go beyond the Sephiroth, the tree of life, the celestial planes, and we start moving through the void realms that are beyond them, what you'll find is that the further up you go, you're kind of dissolving duality with both of them in that sense. So you're actually interacting with forces that are not limited by duality at all. And basically, they all kind of lead back to the same place, which is the absolute. Okay, the absolute, what the Gnostics may call the Abraxian state. Okay, the absolute, which is the kind of meeting point of the polarities, the kind of what you could call the real creator consciousness, which is the non-dualistic absolute. So, you know, the non-dualistic absolute, you know, being what you could call the real God, the real creator consciousness, is everything and no thing at the same time. And it extends and separates itself into various polarities, one holding the architecture and one holding the structure and form, one holding potential and one holding form. Understanding that light and dark are not separate from each other in that case. They just enable each other, they activate each other. Okay, the masculine and the feminine. So understand that when you're entering into these more incomprehensible realms, we're entering into states of consciousness that basically will eventually merge the dualities together. And that is a challenging state of being to embody, because you're not walking the comfort of one linear path, of one linear duality. You're not walking the path of darkness, and you're not walking the path of light either. So Trans-Sephirothic initiation is a process that unfolds after. It is a very personal but significant, and is the most pivotal point within your occult-based initiation through the Kabbalistic tree of life, the Sephiroth. And it is something that you do, I feel at least, you have to have in your awareness as you are initiating through the process, because this is something that one way or another you are going to face. And ultimately, the way that you face it is going to be dependent on what your true will desires and what is needed for your evolution. But understand that it is only the training ground, and the phase of initiation that is going to unfold after is going to be far bigger and far more significant and life-defining. This is where the real initiatory process starts, and is where you really start to walk the path of the adept, the path of the adept, the path of the creator, the path of God, as you as divinity, realistically speaking. So very, very big process of initiation that's essential to understand. But I think that is everything that I needed to discuss on this video. Be sure to check out Patreon, as you will find lots of different things relating to Sephirothic initiation and Trans-Sephirothic initiation on there, as well as the Qliphoth. Be sure to check that out, or if you want something more premium, then be sure to check out the Sephira Shamanic School in the first link of the description. But for now, thank you guys, definitely hit like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you.